What is up, everybody? Thank you for stopping by to talk a trio of Brock Purdy Dynasty trades. And if you want to go ahead and skip to the first of the three deals, not offended at all, by all means, go ahead. But before I get there, let me introduce myself. My name is Chu. You can check me out on Twitter and, of course, here on YouTube at Father Dynasty. And if you're enjoying this video, even just a little bit, hit that like button. Even if you only like it a little bit and you still hit the like button, I won't know the difference. So I'll tell myself you like it a lot. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this, and I will keep doing it. But getting to the man of the hour, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. I think he's relevant by this point. 19.5 fantasy points per game on the season. That actually puts him in similar company to Patrick Mahomes, Sam Howell, and Jordan Love, all of which at 19.3 points per game. Good company to keep, certainly. And again, not saying these are all the same quarterback, but simply for the sake of the 2023 season to this point, after week 13, that's where we're at. So looking at Brock Purdy, kind of the highs and the lows of what he's done thus far. So of his 12 games this year, he's had 6 in the top 12, 2 of which he was the quarterback to, including his tremendous win that he just had in week 13 over the Eagles. So not bad at all. And again, he's had a couple of low weeks, but overall pretty steady. Looking at the offense he plays in, I think everyone's heard about the high-flying, QB-friendly offense that is Kyle Shanahan's 49ers system there. He's got weapons aplenty. He's got Deebo Samuel. He's 6th in yards after the catch per game among wide receivers. In the game that I was just talking about with the Eagles, on 7 touches, he generated 138 total yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, I know that he's not doing that every game, but that kind of speaks to the system that he's working within. Another weapon, George Kittle. He's 3rd in yards after the catch per game, and that is among tight ends, of course. Christian McCaffrey, an absolute monster, and as you can see, the jersey is behind me. I am a Panthers fan, so tough to see him go, but I think for the sake of his career, he could not have gone somewhere better. Top 3 in rushing yards before and after contact per game. He's a monster. And Brandon Ayuk, he is top 20 in air yards per game. So again, overall, these are the primary weapons. There's, again, plenty of other ones that, kind of play the role, so to speak, but overall, very friendly offense to play in for Brock Purdy. And that does not discount his ability. It's still the decision-making. He still does use his athleticism to, get out of jams and give himself a little more time overall. One of the biggest pieces, certainly outside of his production, outside of his weapons, from an NFL standpoint, is the benefit that the 49ers have in terms of what Purdy is being paid. So it's often that teams will look to build around a quarterback on his rookie deal, and that's assuming it's actually going to be, say, a first-round rookie quarterback who, comparatively to, once they get their first deal, once that rookie deal's up, that rookie deal's cheaper, tremendously cheaper. But when you look at what Brock Purdy is making, I'll run through a couple of names here, just fractionally speaking, comparatively to, what he's making right now. He's making half as much as Easton Stick, 1/3 of what Teddy Bridgewater is making, 1/4 of what Drew Lock is making, 1/5 of what Sam Darnold is making, 1/6 of what Mitch Trubisky is making, 1/7 of what Taylor Heineke is making, 1/8 of what Jacoby Brissett is making, 1/9 of what Zach Wilson is making, and 1/10 of what Bryce Young is making. So just to put that in perspective, these are some of these guys who are not starters or maybe are not performing tremendously well. Another one I mentioned last, Bryce Young, hits a little close to home, and I think that maybe speaks more to the offense in terms of the O-line, the scheme, and the weapons around him as to why he's performing so poorly. But just to put it in perspective of how little the Niners are paying, and that's in terms of average annual value of that contract, that's what his is fractionally compared to those guys. So that speaks to how tremendously important it is that the Niners compete now while he's in the second year of his 4-year deal where he's being paid peanuts. And looking at his value on the free tool, Keep Trade Cut, as get a little group think there. So he is the quarterback 13, and that is one behind Dak Prescott and one ahead of Justin Fields. Pretty comparable to where I have him. So in my dynasty rankings, I have him as the QB 12, one behind Dak Prescott, and then one ahead of Trevor Lawrence. And if you want to go ahead and check out the rest of my dynasty rankings, I have them over at goingfor2.com. But jumping into the first of the 3 deals here, so we've got a 12-team start 10, half PPR, no tight end premium. So this is a quick little 2 for 2. We've got Zay Flowers and a 2025 first for Puka Nacua and Brock Purdy. And this is super flex, just as a reminder, all these are. So pretty simply here, I'm picking Puka Nacua and Brock Purdy. But just trying to compare the two sides, I tried to kind of pare things down just so I can really digest something. This is only 2 pieces on each side, so it's not too difficult to follow. But honestly, even if I'm just simply looking at, if it's Puka Nacua versus Zay Flowers, I'd rather have Puka Nacua. I know that Zay Flowers he's had flashes, probably more recently so than Puka Nacua, who's had a couple of down weeks. But if we're just comparing those two, if I'm thinking about, I think Zay Flowers is going to do pretty well for the rest of this season with Mark Andrews gone and down with injury. But what does it look like next season? We know Lamar Jackson's there. Great. We know that Zay Flowers, of course, will be there. We know that Mark Andrews is going to be I feel like we know enough of the weapons that are still going to be there. And while Zay Flowers, I know, should be a focal point, we know that Mark Andrews is going to get his. He'll be entering his age 29 season, I believe. And he's under contract for the next couple of years. I think they have an out, but they're not going to get out of that contract. Why would they want to? He's tremendously productive. Hopefully they finally have a healthy running back room, possibly led by Keaton Mitchell at this point. Who knows? But overall, that offense, it spreads it around pretty well. And between those two, I take Puka. And if I'm looking at Brock Purdy versus a 2025 first, I'm taking Brock Purdy. Because also, it's not 2024. We have less certainty as to where that first is even going to fall. So if I'm simply looking at that, it's super flex. I usually lean the quarterback side unless there's a pretty tremendous piece on the other side or a number of picks. And, while I do like the idea of getting a future first there, I do like the staying power of Puka Nacua, even though I know he doesn't have the same draft capital as Zay Flowers. Then maybe that might tarnish his value in some people's eyes. But Puka Nacua and Brock Purdy, in really any scenario, regardless of what your team situation's like, I like that a lot. So jumping over to the second of the 3 deals, 12 teams start 10, full point PPR, and half point tight end premium. So this one, a little bit shorter, but I think this is a good kind of lesson in figuring out, just based on purely picks, what is Purdy's value. So Brock Purdy for a 2024 first and a 2024 third. This one had me think for a second, because if I simply just assume, we're getting closer to the end of the 2023 season, so presumably you'd have at least a better idea as to where those picks are going to fall. I don't. I'm simply referring to the trades as it is on the Dynasty Daddy trade database, so it's just the picks. If I'm looking at it and I'm seeing a mid-first and mid-third, or, if the first is not concretely one of the top 3 picks, probably one of the top 2 picks, I don't know, because probably if it's one of the top 2 picks, I would lean the first and the third side. But if you think of the value, the staying power of Brock Purdy in that offense, I really trust that offense in that system. And for the people that say he's a system quarterback, okay, but it's a really good system to be in. I think he's good enough in terms of, what he needs to do to operate well in that offense. And whatever slights you want to give to him, they can, I guess, all be covered up in that offense. And they have such a tremendous defense, they're able to build around him because he has such a cheap contract that helps him to manage the offense. Again, he's a very efficient quarterback. He works and makes decisions very quickly, very well, very accurately. And that does well for, obviously, the Niners in terms of wins, and that does well for fantasy if you have Brock Purdy. So barring that first being the 101 or the 102, I'm going to go ahead on the Brock Purdy side. So jumping over to the third of the 3 trades, the final one here, This one's got a couple more pieces. So 12 teams start 10, full PPR, half-point tight end premium. Brock Purdy, Calvin Ridley, in a 2024 second for Mark Andrews, Jahan Dotson, and a 2024 first. Now, in my opinion, this is a sneaky way to level up a quarterback. Just kind of thinking that just off the top. I know oftentimes when you have a quarterback on one side, you likely try to have one on the other side to balance it out. Again, it's not trading, quarterback for quarterback specifically, but oftentimes, even if you're trading away a better quarterback, say, give me someone else back, someone else that is maybe one of the 32 starters, and then we'll go from there. But I'm not a big believer in Ridley. Wasn't coming into the season. Of course, he had his one good game there, bit of a drought, came back, had another couple of big games. So, overall, I think he had his, about 3 or 4 top 12 finishes, and other than that, he's had some rough outings. He's finished outside of even the top 30, top 40 a number of times. So he's all but disappeared in a way that I think many people, even the Ridley detractors, didn't think was going to happen. I call that a function of Trevor Lawrence's up and down performances, but he's also been able to feed Christian Kirk pretty well. Evan Ingram's done well. Of course, Travis Etienne has had a booming season. So overall, you already know how I feel about Brock Purdy. Calvin Ridley, he's getting a bit older, but again, I think he still has, enough production in him. And again, if you needed to flip him, you then have Calvin Ridley in a 2024 second. Don't know where that 2024 second is going to fall, but I think you could pair those together, maybe add another pick and level up to a more elite wide receiver, a little bit younger, maybe like mid-20s, or even a younger receiver that hasn't quite popped yet on trying to buy on that upside. But looking at the other side, Andrews, tremendous value. He is tied to Lamar, again, like I was previously just talking about there. He's under contract until, that's it, the 2025 season. Okay. So the team does have the outs before, but they're not going to take the outs. He's a tremendous tight end. Dotson, really, I was pretty high on Dotson coming into the season. I'm a big Sam Howell fan, so I was very excited to see Jahan Dotson have a pretty productive season amidst a little bit of injury towards the beginning. And he had, back-to-back weeks. He finished in the top 10 for fantasy, had touchdowns each week. Other than that, it's been pretty rough. And it's not for a lack of Sam Howell doing well, but it's a function of him spreading the ball to everybody in that Bieniemy offense. And I think there's a bit of uncertainty, going forward. What is this offense going to look like next year? Is Ron Rivera going to be the head coach? I assume he's not. I assume best case scenario for him, he's going to be maybe like the president of football operations or some version of that to kind of help, with culture, but not be the GM necessarily. So kind of like a figurehead role, but maybe not like too managerial necessarily. But overall, I'm taking the Brock Purdy, Calvin Ridley in 2024 second. Tough to give up that 2024 first. Mark Andrews, of course, I'd expect him to come back next season, presumably at the beginning. I'm not sure of the timeline of his recovery there, but I like that player. Jahan Dotson, I do still like him, but again, really nervous about the future of what's going to happen there in Washington. So yeah, we'll go with that. But please let me know down in the comments, what do you think of each of these trades? Have you possibly had a recent Brock Purdy trade that you want to talk about and bring up, or are you thinking about doing one? Drop it in the comments. Very curious to hear about it. Love to share my thoughts. And of course, obviously hear yours as well. So, yep. Happy Dynasty.